Also a board member of the Society for Professional Journalists Detroit, a chapter that of the larger organization that supports the free press in all kinds of ways nationwide. As you might have just seen, we are recording this, so heads up. Uh, but we're also going to have a good live conversation here today. I am full of questions with for both our panelists here today. About the investigation that they have been pursuing over the past few years about a very curious story involving a $20 million earmark, a $4,500 coffee maker, and most significantly, how power works in Michigan, how power and money move in Michigan. It was the winner of the inaugural A-Mark Prize for Investigative Journalism, which SPJ Detroit sponsored in partnership with the A-Mark Foundation. This is a prize that celebrates ambitious investigative reporting that exposes wrongdoing, holds the powerful accountable, and illuminates complex issues. That we are going to dig into exactly how this prize did that, but I'm also going to plug in here right now a link to SPJ's Detroit's website where you can see the full announcement, including some really great winners of our second and third prize and honorable mentions. We have a lot of really excellent reporting happening in and around Detroit and the state of Michigan, and it is not something that I take for granted these days or any day. So. With that said, I want to make sure to introduce our folks. We have, let's see, we have Beth LeBlanc, a reporter with the Detroit News whose focuses on politics and state government, the lead winner of our prize. And we also have Chad Livengood, the politics editor and columnist at the Detroit News, who's also been deeply involved with the workings of Lansing for many years. So to get this conversation started, Beth, I wanted to start with you to just let's begin by like setting the table. So this project, when I was looking back and reading these stories, it actually took me aback at how long ago, like how many links back I had to go to like find the like first story, and it was like early 2023. This and I wonder if you could just like begin by kind of bringing us back in time a little bit. What was going on in Michigan in spring 2023? What was happening in Lansing?
Yeah, well, actually, so well, first of all, thank you everyone for being here. I feel like I'm kind of preaching to the choir because you all are such amazing journalists, and I know there was a lot of amazing journalism that was entered for this contest, and I feel really honored to have won it. But I also feel like I'm among really great people right now, so thank you for taking the time to be here. Um, but yeah, so this started actually in like July 2022. That was when sort of an overnight session, as they're wont to do, the legislature passed the annual budget. And within that budget was an unprecedented amount of what we call like pork barrel or pet project spending. It's also called earmarks. When people are trying to be a little more diplomatic about it, they say earmarks. Others just call it pork. But there was about $1 billion of pork in that budget, added at a very late hour into the budget before lawmakers voted on it. Very few had a chance to. And then we were kind of trying to catch up, with like the broad strokes of the budget. And I really credit my coworker, Craig Mauger, who really saw this earmark issue as a problem and like something we really needed. We had a responsibility to look into because it was so broad and just stretching across several different donors and political parties, the people who were receiving these grants. And I think there were questions about whether it was a good use of taxpayer dollars. So we did a couple of initial stories, like some broad strokes looking at, these were going to political donors. These were going to former heads of the Michigan Republican Party. These were going to nonprofits set up by developers to build a building. It was just like a web of different grants that we're trying to sort through. At that time, we could not figure out what all these grants were doing. There were the language that they used to describe them is like very, very vague. And so it's hard to figure out. And I guess in terms of like an environment at that time, at that time in July 2022, it was ahead of both the Michigan gubernatorial election and the House election, in which Republicans were trying to fight to maintain control. So a lot of people had a lot of different motivations with some of these grants as they were looking for support in the election that November. At that point, my memory fails me a little bit, but I think we saw the Global Link grant at that point, but we couldn't figure out who it was going to. It was actually labeled as G-Link, and then it was given like population coordinates that we couldn't figure out which city it was, because they'll name it in the budget like a city between 40,000 and 80,000 in a county of this size, and we could not figure it out at that point. So we kind of put a pin in it, and we later found out that the budget office eventually creates like these one-pager documents, is what we dubbed them, but they're basically the lawmakers announce which grants they had sponsored and who they're going to and what the purpose is. And so we asked the budget office to give us those documents, and they started supplying them to us in basically waves of documents. The Global Link grant was the last one to come through in March 2023. So it took us 8 or 9 months to get that document where we could see that it was going to Global Link, that it was run by a woman named Faye Baydoun, and that it was listed as sponsored by House Speaker Jason Wentworth.
Well, a follow-up question on that. I mean, it sounds like, so you spent like you and your colleague like spent 8 or 9 months, kind of trying to untangle, this like huge web of spending that was very murky and that required a lot of reporting. And one big tool to discern what was the state budget office like reports. But was that something you had to like send a record request into, and that they were just unleashing like serially? Like why were they coming in batches as opposed to just being like, I don't know, done by the end of August or whatever?
Yeah, because they had like a deadline of putting in those sponsor sheets of March 2023. And it's basically the legislature puts them in when they're ready. And or at least it was like that at that time. And so that was why we were getting batches. I actually don't think we ever put a formal request
No.
in, but we basically had this agreement with the budget office. Like, as you get them in, can you send them to us? So yeah.
Interesting. And this was literally the last one out of this unprecedented amount of like spending.
It was in the last batch. Yeah, in March 2023, it was in the last batch. And
Fascinating.
Yeah.
For context there, we're talking about 200 plus earmarks.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when we first learned about this, I was like, Beth, can we just ask them and start sending them in? And when they get them, and then we just started getting them, and they just started piling up, and we started looking at them and trying to understand them, and they, they led to different. Some of them led to different stories, and then we finally found out what this Global Link thing was.
Chad, do you remember the first time related to the Global Link one in particular, the first time that made like what in that sheet made you go like, this is different even than the other ones that we've been reporting on?
Well, what got me really my juices flowing was when we found out what Global Link was. We found out who was behind Global Link, and Faye Baydoun, who had been the longtime director of the American Arab Chamber of Commerce. I know who she is from being a business reporter at Grains, and so I instantly knew she was a prominent business person. And we know that she's on the executive committee of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and just a quick search revealed that she was currently at the time, or had been recently, a vice chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party. And so she's been kind of very active in the political apparatus and the business apparatus of the state. And so that got my attention. And then when Beth told me that they had just incorporated Global Link days after the budget was passed. So this organization did not exist on paper when they were granted $20 million for their purpose. And so that was really the big alarm bell to me, was like, okay, this is new. Plus, we were also finding like for-profit companies getting money directly. Beth referenced the developer, the Roxbury Group went and created an organization called the Lower Town Conservancy, which is a nonprofit that was set up to take another 20 or 30 million dollars and use it to help redevelop some dirty land along the banks of the Huron River in Ann Arbor, right next to the train station. And so we just are finding all these different entities that were finding ways into getting this money in an unprecedented sum. And so the curiosity of how did this get here and who made it happen became the kind of guidepost questions that we just tried to figure out.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, definitely the incorporation date of the business was a big red flag for us because it was after the budget had passed. So they were basically giving a grant to a non-existing company at that point. I think the other thing that stood out to me too was, as Chad said, we had been covering quite a few of these grants, and quite a few of them had been sponsored by the House Speaker. And we would approach him about it, and he'd say, yeah, I did sponsor that. This is why I'm defending it. This is why I think it's a good use of taxpayer money. Even when it was going to to a for-profit company, he defended that spending. When we asked him about this, he seemed genuinely shocked that his name was on it. And he said, I did not sponsor that. And I said, well, your name is on this budget document. And he has maintained to this day that he didn't sponsor it, and he doesn't know why his name was on there. Yeah.
Did the budget office like respond to any query about like, well, this is on here, but he says, yeah, like, what did they say about that discrepancy?
So I believe they are forwarded those sponsorship documents by the House and Senate business offices. So like the House and Senate, basically within their apparatuses, they gather the sponsors and then send them over to the budget office. One thing that we learned through reporting is that there were several grants that were basically sponsorless, and either because people didn't want to admit to sponsoring them or because it just fell through the cracks and people forgot what they sponsored. But so they would assign them to, like, for example, the Senate Appropriations Chair said, I had a lot assigned to me. I was okay with it. So I've wondered over the years if that's what happened with like this grant, but I don't really know why. And the budget office just said, look, that's the information that the House sent over.
The Lower Town, the Ann Arbor redevelopment that was tied to the Roxbury Group, a for-profit developer in Detroit. That one, they had to actually go out and recruit Senator Jeff Irwin to be the sponsor after the fact. It was, months after the fact. Put your name on this. And we had done a whole story. Beth and Craig did this whole story about the sponsors being murky in about October of 2022. Where, there was 18 I believe, appropriations assigned to Senator Jim Stamas, an outgoing Senate Appropriations Chair. It had a lot of alarm bells there that looked like leadership was essential leadership, or term-limited lawmakers were sponsoring things that were way outside of their district. I think he had one that was like the Grand Rapids Symphony Orchestra or something in Grand Rapids, and he's a senator from Midland. And so we just started questioning really whether this was true, whether any of this information was really true, basically, whether these were really the true sponsors or whether basically the outgoing Senate Appropriations Chairman was taking a bullet for some other lawmaker who didn't want to have their name attached to something that looked, maybe a little unseemly. And so yeah, that's kind of how that got that rolling. And as we started seeing more of those one pagers, our eyebrows were lifting high.
Well, another question is like, just to pan out for a minute. I mean, the people, the earmarks, the porks, this kind of comes up with, budget after budget. It sounds like, just to contextualize what's going on here, it sounds like in this case, there was a number of distinguishing things. There was like, murky, especially murky sponsorships or outright absent sponsorships. There was like, this, in the case of this $20 million one, there's a highly influential person who received it on behalf of an organization that didn't exist at the time, which is appropriated, and a sponsor who seemed genuinely shocked that his name was attached to it. And is there anything else that, was kind of like, on the table that like, that made you been like, okay, we're going to like really put some time into, we're pursuing a lot of different like kind of stories, but this one we're going to do a lot more follow up, especially.
Yeah. The one other thing that stood out to us was that Faye Baydoun at that point was an appointee to the Michigan Economic Development Corporation Executive Committee, which the executive committee is basically the governing arm over the MEDC, and the MEDC administers these grants. So basically, Faye Baydoun was sitting on a panel over the MEDC, and the MEDC was administering her $20 million grant for her. So that really stood out to us as a potential, a potential conflict, a real conflict there. The MEDC maintained that that they sign conflict of interest forms and that they don't really have that much influence over it, but it certainly was something that stood out to us right away.
So Beth, like, what do you do next? You're like, okay, the alarm bells are on, and you're like, okay, this is very interesting. I want to learn more. Like, what do you specifically do?
Yeah, so we did the initial story in March or April 2023. I can't really remember.
Yeah, March.
Yeah, just saying that this person is very influential. They're a Democratic donor, an appointee of the governor. There's this kind of conflict. We kind of laid it all out there. And then that House Speaker Jason Wentworth said he had met with Baydoun, but that he had determined this wasn't like a grant he wanted to get behind, and he didn't understand why his name was listed as a sponsor. So we ran that story in like spring 2023. And then the next thing we could do, because there is very little documentation on these grants, especially in the early months. So I knew from the language in the budget that these folks, anyone who received one of these grants would have to submit quarterly reports to the MEDC about how they were spending these grants. So I started poking around to see like, okay, when can we put in this FOIA for the grant, talking to the MEDC, when do you expect her first? And they're like, listen, she still has to sign the grant. Or I think I'm getting the timeline mixed up, but at some point they released 10 million to her of the grant. So the legislative language required half of the grant to be released at the front end, which is unusual compared to the way that agencies usually operate, which is on a reimbursement basis. As you spend, you put in receipts, you get the money. So we started putting in FOIAs for the quarterly reports, but I don't think they had any really ready until the end of 2023 or spring of the next year. And to be honest, like we were kind of keeping our thumb on it like throughout the year because there wasn't anything new to report, but we knew these reports eventually would be coming in. And we're honestly still reporting on other earmarks in the budget and then also reporting on new earmarks in the 2023 budget under the Democratic majority.
It doesn't really stop, huh?
More stuff was coming. Yes.
Yeah. But
news every day.
But we knew there were a few of these, and the reaction, I have to say, the reaction to that spring 2023 story made me think there's something more there. There were folks who were pretty disgruntled by it or very curious about it, more so than the other stories that we'd done. So I was like, well, this is one where we really probably want to try and get these quarterly reports because something feels off about this.
Well, and the other thing that got our attention was the reaction to this story, and this was not. I don't believe this was front page news. I mean, we just it was a story inside the paper that day, but someone, I'll just describe it as someone close to the governor called me screaming and dropping obscenities. And it went along the lines of change the effing headline.
Wow.
Um, and and they wanted it to be about Wentworth. They
Wow.
said this is a Wentworth grant, and I said this is a Whitmer appointee who is on the board of directors of the agency that administers the money. This is not a usual thing.
Yeah.
And as Beth's reporting has totally exposed since then, we later found out that Faye Beydoun had been lobbying the agency internally for 3 years or 2 years before the passage of the bill, and was very much trying to curry favor for this project with the CEO of the MEDC, who's one of his bosses is Faye Beydoun. And so but that when people in the administration were reacting with vitriol the day that this story came out, I kind of sensed that there was something more than just another Jason Wentworth piece of pork, of which there were a lot of them, and we were looking into them as well because the speaker had it looked like he had also just taken a few bullets for some members or done
Mm-hmm.
some things and it was some of the reporting bared out. He did do some things for some friends, and that's another case we can talk about at some point. But
So, okay, so very intriguing. Also, you're very busy with lots of other news that's like happening and following up on this. And then I gather that there's one day you just open up your email and the reports are there.
Yeah, we started getting the reports, I think in the spring of 2024.
yeah,
And they basically backdated them to they were reports going back to October of her spending. And so we started going through it and you know, the coffee maker jumped out at me right
Well,
away.
slow down. Let's back up a little bit. Like, tell us. I
Yeah.
was 100% going to ask about it, but like you're looking at it and tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, so they're not well organized, these reports. A lot of them are just just this roughshod grouping of receipts that are photocopied into there and
Hmm.
sometimes checks and and just kind of all. But the MEDC, the way they break it down, they use actually Chad pointed out the other day, they use Salesforce to get these reports back from folks. And then so we could see that she had spent thousands of dollars, and there were a lot of Wayfair receipts. There were a lot of a check to a friend for furniture from
Hmm.
an estate sale. Lots of furniture. The other thing that jumped out at me about the receipts was they were all getting delivered to her personal address,
Hmm.
or most of them were. And I know that's the address that she had on the business entity, but I was like, well, why would she be getting furniture delivered to her home for
Hmm.
an office? So that, and then yeah, I mean then the coffee maker, there was I think it was Williams and Sonoma, the receipt. And then
I was actually wondering what specifically kind of coffee maker it is. I mean,
yeah, and
I don't even know. It's like, does it have rockets attached? Like, I don't know. It just seems like
I
really.
mean, so it was sold through Williams and Sonoma. The brand is Jura. I have a $10 coffee maker, so I was not familiar with it. I had to come up to snuff on it pretty quickly. And yeah, and it was like 3,900 for the actual coffee maker, and then all the additions brought it to 4,500. There was also, first class flight to Budapest for $11,000. There was, I'm trying to think of lots of furniture purchases. There were a few receipts that I could not figure out, and I couldn't figure out until later, like rent receipts for different offices in like an office in Birmingham, I think.
So she did have some offices.
You know, it's not clear, like she was paying rent at one or two offices or had begun paying rent. I'm not sure that she ever actually moved into them, and I never got that clarified. I also at that time, Faye was still communicating with me at that time. And
Yeah,
so,
I am curious. What was she saying?
yeah, so she was, she was she was defending it at that point, saying, I'm a businesswoman. I'm trying to attract businesses into Michigan because the that was the goal of Global Link, was to attract, I think, like second stage entrepreneurs from other nations into Michigan. And she was talking to me about that and kind of saying like, this is the cost of doing business, of setting up a business. At the same time, we also were talking to the American Arab Chamber of Commerce, which expressed a lot of concern about this grant because, as we've reported, they were under the impression that she was in Lansing trying to get a grant for the American Arab Chamber of Commerce because she was the executive director of that group at that time. And they said it kind of sounded like they might have learned that she got the grant for a separate business right as our original story was coming out.
Hmm.
And she parted shortly after that, which was also around the time she got her first 10 million.
Mhm.
So she was defending herself. She said, I think she defended her actions and said, I felt I could run this business best, like separate from them. And yeah.
And just for the timeline again here, like what Beth's later reporting also revealed was that Beydoun started talking to people in the MEDC about this in 2020. We've got emails and calendars that established that there was this effort being talked about. Then we have a paper trail that shows that she was talking to members of the governor's inner circle as soon or as far back as September or October of 2021, and this has come out in some of the criminal warrant or affidavits that were for the search warrant that established that there was the email discussion between Trish Foster, the governor's chief operating officer, and Faye Beydoun, in which Faye uses the term global link in the conversation. So lawmakers that knew anything about this were under the impression this was an Arab American Chamber of Commerce deal. And even I believe Wentworth essentially thought that was what it was for, even though it said they didn't want to claim ownership to it. But this establishes that there was something of a plan to create a different entity as far back as September of 2021, some 9 months before the entity was created and funded. And then another 9 months passed, and then or 8 or 9 months, and it comes out in the one pager that this is who is getting the money, and suddenly Faye is like quitting her longtime job as the head of the Arab Chamber in Dearborn, and starting this new startup organization with $20 million to spend as she sees fit.
Yeah.
I recall like there was also, at least at this point, she's telling you she's getting this organization started, there's some upfront costs, we're trying to attract people. And if I recall, like there was also, indications. She said that she had, like a board, and there was like an employee, or like she had like one or another employee as well too. Like what was the shape of the organization at this point, and at this like April 2024 point when this like this story comes out?
Yeah. Well, at that point it was pretty vague. I think she told me, yes, she did. She told me she had a board because then I was like, who's on the board? And she said, I don't want you to harass them. So she didn't give me the names of the board members. And of course, there was no paperwork filed at that point, so I couldn't figure it out.
Hmm.
And then I think there I think at that point she had one or two employees. That number has always shifted through time, and it has been kind of a mystery to me. Like I could see in her receipts that she was paying salaries and insurance costs for some people. But some of the receipts, and this is one of the things that was difficult in reporting this story is like we knew she was paying herself through different means. We knew that she was paying herself a lot of money, but we could never prove it because the receipts that we were receiving, they would redact who it was going to, the money. So like, whether they thought that was personally identifiable information or what have you, but they would redact so we could see the payments there, but we couldn't see which employee it was going to. And so we couldn't say for sure what her salary was until much later in the game. But yeah, I think there were employees there. At some point, we've learned through later filings that in like May 2024, all of her board members resigned. And then at some point she got new board members, but it's not clear to me at least when those new board members came on. And it does appear like she was operating for a while without board members, which is not great if you're a nonprofit. And yeah, so I think that was pretty. I do want to mention too, when we got those first receipts, and I was thinking like the coffee maker is weird, but I put it like further down in the story, and I credit Chad, who was like, oh no, that's got to go in the lead. He's like, that's going in the headline. Like, so
I feel like it's the number one thing people remember, even more
yeah,
than the 20 million total. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that the coffee maker somehow stands out
yeah,
as is symbolizing the whole thing. That's really funny.
yeah.
Um, well,
It had a very golden toilets at the Pentagon feel to it. And so it just seemed like it's something we needed to elevate.
yeah. Well, it does land. Folks, just for the rest of the audience, I have more questions for Beth and Chad, but if you have questions too, I encourage you to put them into the comment box, and we will be sure to bring some of them into the conversation. So ask away. Okay, so we have, I mean, I feel like once you have about the information you had in April 2024, there's a lot of different rocks you could turn over. Can you tell us maybe first of all about some of the rocks that had nothing under it? Like what are some like detours or false starts or things that you thought might be kind of interesting or connected that actually turned out to be, to use a professional term, a nothing burger?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, there were over the past couple of years, there have been a lot of rumors about how this came to be, about what it's been spent on. We've looked into a lot of those, and I can't rule them out completely, but I can't prove them either. So so there I would say there's that. There have been a lot of FOIAs that have come back basically empty, correspondence that we've been trying to find. Well, actually, yeah. So at one point, because we had heard that there were earlier meetings with the American Arab Chamber of Commerce in Beydoun and members of the MEDC. So at one point, I FOIA'd like the schedules and emails of some folks who would have been in those meetings to try and confirm that they took place. And we were able to find some proof of that. But what we also turned up inadvertently in that FOIA request was a letter that Faye Beydoun had written to like the Deputy Prime Minister of Qatar, or Qatar. I don't know how to pronounce it, but
For
she said,
writers.
yes, I know, that's why I'm not a broadcast journalist. But she had written a letter and she sent it to MEDC and said, I need the governor's signature on this. And it was like inviting the deputy prime minister to Michigan to look at I don't know, to look at like business opportunities or whatever. This was before Global Link. It was like in 2021. And what surprised me about that, well, I thought it was, I guess I don't know how those things work, but I thought it was kind of strange that somebody could like author a letter with on behalf of Governor Whitmer. Like it didn't even,
Mm.
it like was addressing the deputy prime minister if she were the governor, and then saying like, if you have any questions, contact Faye Baydoun or Quentin Messer. And it had Faye's personal number in it. And I thought that was kind of odd, doubly so because within like days, she had gotten the governor's signature for it.
Mm.
And I
Well,
just thought that was strange that they could do a turnaround that quickly on
Mm.
a letter to a foreign leader. But we sat on it at that point because we're like, I don't know if this really fits into what we're reporting right now on this grant. As it would
Yep.
turn out, we did find a use for it later on in basically showing how much pull she did have. You know, that she could write a letter to a foreign leader on behalf of the governor and get it signed within days. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, Beth picked up a bunch of rocks and we weren't sure what we were looking at in some of these instances. And so we had to put the rock back down. And then more events came out. I mean, when the AG's affidavit came out on the search warrant, we learned we were able to piece together a bunch of things that we had just been basically accumulated in 2 years and not really sure pieces of information from sources. I mean, we've talked to dozens of people about this whole um, affair. I mean, from the legislature to the MEDC to the Chamber of Commerce, and so sometimes these stories just do not always click as soon as you get the information, or you don't always, you can't always put together the pieces. It just requires more reporting and like just getting the backstory. Like I said that earlier about the Trish Foster email. It had a reference saying it was great seeing you at Mackinac. And I was like, this has to be September of 2021, the only Mackinac, Detroit Chamber Mackinac conference in September that year because of COVID. So and that so that was like one of the moments where just like a kind of figured out the puzzle and the timeline of events. And we're still trying to figure it out. There's still a bunch of holes in this story that we haven't quite smoked out yet.
Yeah, I think that's just overall, I think that's one thing to take away, that like this isn't done. Like there's still a lot, and I know I'm sure the Attorney General has a lot more information that we don't have because of her subpoena power and everything. So we're really interested to see what comes out, because there are still a lot of questions that we don't have answered yet.
Well, one quick question is like, I mean, in terms of like real world impact, when did you start seeing these reverberations? So like, was it like the AG moving on this? Was there other intimations of this? Is there anything beyond the criminal investigation that you see as a consequence of this reporting to date?
Yeah, within a few weeks, the Attorney General had confirmed she had launched an investigation after the coffee maker story. I'm not entirely sure that it was that story alone. I also know that there had been some kind of referral from the FBI at some point, and I think it was like somebody had a complaint about it. They went to the FBI, and the FBI was like, "This isn't in our wheelhouse," and they just forwarded it to the AG or something of that effect. But so I don't know if there were other complaints coming in aside from our reporting. But yeah, so that was within a few weeks. They also there were in the budget that year there were initial efforts to somehow claw back the grant to prevent more money from being spent or whatever. Those were proposed by both House and Senate Democrats, and then we've found through reporting later on that the budget office basically said, like, you can't do that. The money is appropriated. You can't pull it back. So I guess that's kind of strange to me that they can't, but I don't know. It didn't appear in the final budget version. then, it was, so there were a lot of political attacks based on it because it was a donor to Governor Whitmer. It was the coffee maker made a really catchy campaign slam or whatever. So we saw that happening. I know the legislature at that time put some new guardrails in regarding earmarks, but they didn't do a ton. Like it was like you eventually have to disclose who the sponsor was, and we're going to post it publicly, but it was months and months after the budget passed that they would have to. So those initial efforts weren't like super impactful in that sense. Yeah, so and then it just kind of the more we reported on it, the more people got involved, and yeah, I don't know. Eventually, more recently is led to some significant earmark reform, but in those beginning stages, it was just kind of like, well, let's try to do something to kind of address this.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, the governor just yesterday signed a bill that now makes it law that there has to be 45 days disclosure in advance of final passage of the budget bill of earmarks. And so back in the spring or rather than the winter, when Republicans took over the House, Speaker Matt Hall and this caucus proposed they wanted months in advance, and so they actually started doing it. They had a website. They had every member just put together what they were willing to put their name to, and they put out like a list of a wish list of $3 billion or something of stuff. And I mean, a lot of it was traditional pet projects, overpass bridge and downriver to separate this rail grade, fix this road in Oakland County, built by a fire truck in Alcona County, that kind of stuff. But then the Senate just didn't want to engage on this subject, and they just kind of plowed ahead. And so Hall did use this as big leverage in the budget negotiations, and he essentially forced the Senate to disclose their earmarks, and they finally put them up on a website on October 1st, the day the budget was due, but after they had passed this like 1 week budget. And so they disclosed their earmarks about 48 hours in advance, or some of them actually just came in the day of. But anyways, we reported out a bunch of these ever since. But nonetheless, the Senate finally kind of acquiesced to this, and Hall wanted a 90-day disclosure, and the Senate wanted 10, and they split the baby. It took 45. Back when this all started kind of coming out, and our reporting was just revealing a whole lot of the machinations of how this money got put in. I wrote a column saying there should just be a 5-day rule for this, because there's a 5-day rule. If you pass a bill out of the House, it has to set on the calendar and wait 5 days before it can pass the Senate, so that the legislature cannot just pass laws in one day, essentially. And because we see what happens when you have laws that get laws or policies that get absolutely no vetting or no public hearings. And these earmarks are just in the same category, where none of them go through appropriate, I mean, maybe in the future they will, but none of them have really gone through appropriations committees and get talked about or examined, or any kind of level of vetting. And I mean, the vetting in this case, it literally took years. I mean, the timeline here was, Beth again didn't find out who the actual recipient of this money is, some 8-9 months after the fact, and then it took a year to get the initial receipts. To find out about the coffee maker and the plane tickets, and then it took another year to find out how much she was getting paid. We didn't report that until this spring, I believe. And so I mean, just one revelation after another. And one other thing I want to mention also, in the fallout last spring, and when the story came out and about the coffee maker, and the legislature started scrutinizing, and Nestle started scrutinizing. Beydoun wrote a letter to the governor, which we got like how many months after that? 8 months later, we got this letter. We through a FOIA saying, "Hey, I'm going to shut this thing down." And then Beth just did the math on the next report and showed after she pledged to shut this thing down, she spent under $700,000. And so this is not incremental. This is like reporting what happened, and trying to keep on top of it. And credit to Beth to just keep going after these reports, and asking for them, and then just literally simply doing the math.
That is a notable point. Beth, just bringing in some of the questions from the chat here. Can you talk a little bit about Faye's history and track record before this? Was she a successful businesswoman or executive director? Was she previously well respected? What was her story before she's become kind of the poster child for this much larger systemic issue?
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming she had some business success because she was on an export council in Detroit. She was the head of the American Arab Chamber of Commerce. She was vice chair for the Michigan Democratic Party. I believe she's like she was a bundler for the governor's 2018 campaign. So she was involved in a lot. And I think when I initially started reporting on it, I knew she was a donor and an appointee, and she was on this MEDC executive committee. I did not, I think, realize how well known she was in the community. And as soon as we started running these stories, people would reach out to me and be like, this is a big deal because she is very well known. In the American Arab community, but also in the Democratic community, in the Detroit community, a lot of people knew who she was. And I think a lot of people, I think they knew who she was, and she was well known there, and as a Metro Detroit businesswoman. Yeah.
Another question was, if early on at the time of the coffee maker, did MEDC defend that at the time as, just legitimate business expenses?
This is something that has kind of perplexed me through all of this. So as I would get FOIA responses from the MEDC, and I would get the FOIAs, read over them, and then go back and say, like, hey, she spent $4,500 on a coffee maker, or she's paying herself a salary of $550,000. Does this raise any red flags? And sometimes they seem surprised, like they didn't know. And that confused me because I'm like, you just went through these reports and redacted a ton of stuff. Like, were you not reading them? Like, I don't, but then they would, I think that kind of the pat answer was, and there is some truth to this, is that they were directed by the legislature in the budget to award this grant and to give $10 million up front under the structure that's laid out in the budget. And they initially said, when we get these reports, we receive them, but we don't, and we review them to make sure they're complete, but we don't audit them until the first $10 million is spent. And then when they ask for the second 10 million, then we look them over and see, are these expenses appropriate? And personally, I think 10 million is a lot to spend before you start reviewing receipts. But that was basically, they claimed that was what the law required of them. Now, a year after this, in March of this year, they actually canceled the grant, and it was on the grounds of everything we mentioned in that very first article. So I don't really understand how, they can say we don't have, we're kind of reined in by this legislative language, but then at the same time able to cancel it based on those same issues, a year later. So,
and they didn't get any like unique they weren't like uniquely directed by the legislature or something. They didn't have some authority that they didn't have at the very beginning.
Correct. Yeah, that authority structure didn't change from
Mhm.
when we ran that $4,500 coffee maker story to when they canceled the grant in March of this year.
Is the governor's office, this is another question from the chat, is the governor's office still directing you to Wentworth for comment? Or, is there been any change in approach from um, their early official and unofficial response?
I'm trying to think. I think uh they have still directed us to Jason Wentworth for comment on it and noted that he was the one who sponsored it.
Mhm.
The governor
Yeah,
also signs the budget, so I don't know.
Mhm.
yeah. I mean that's been my retort when I've had pushback as the editor is, hey, this governor has a veto pen and she has never been afraid to use it in the past. There was not a single veto in this $1 billion that was added to this budget. And there's been all these interesting defenses. The MEDC has said, well, look, this is just the legislature. They made us do this. They sent us this money and we had to give it out. And we've just been trying to, really understand what is the policy, what is the how what oversight do you do, and at what points do, and then the other problem that has kind of not worked for the governor's office is we just keep learning more roles of the governor's office in this whole affair.
Hmm.
So, right, we just learned just recently from the search warrant affidavit that we obtained in court from Farmington Hills because they filed a search warrant to search the MEDC's office and Faye Baydoun's office rather than in Ingham County and Oakland County. They filed it just in the district court of Farmington Hills. And let me tell you, the clerk in Farmington Hills has never been harassed by a reporter like Beth LeBlanc, I don't think. So and Craig and I both also stopped there a couple times as we were pursuing this records.
Mhm.
So this in the search warrant affidavit, it revealed that Joanne Holes, chief of staff to the governor, went to Dearborn personally to meet with officials of the American Neighborhood Chamber of Commerce sometime after the first story appeared in the paper in March of 2023 about Baydoun getting this grant to try to smooth over some pretty hurt feelings, it seemed, about the way that the chamber officials thought they were getting this money to do this same initiative that Baydoun had basically talked about internally, according to the chamber officials, and said she was pursuing, and then took off with on her own. And a year or later a year later, when Beth's first story came out about the coffee maker and everything, I was just kind of reviewing something here and just kind of found something that I kind of forgot about a little bit. That the MEDC at the time said they were unaware of any dispute between Baydoun and the American Arab Chamber about regarding the grant, and yet the reporting now shows that the chief of staff of the governor made a personal voyage to Dearborn to try to calm people down over this. And so, I mean, there's been some inconsistencies in the story and the narrative that have continued to pop up as we get more details. I mean, a lot of details came pouring out because of this extraordinary move by the AG to raid the MEDC's offices in June, and that was a fun day. I mean, Beth, we got a tip, and Beth was running down Washington Square.
Were
Uh,
you there? Did you see it happen, Beth?
No, I got there after they had left, but I had blisters afterwards.
Oh my goodness.
I was running down there trying to catch them, but they had left at that point. But when I got back, I called up the AG's office and they confirmed that there had been raid. So
Well, we are coming close on time, so I want to like fold together a couple of the last questions. And while you answer, I'm also going to, for folks who might be attending here who might not yet be a Detroit News subscriber, I'm going to put in the info there, and also let you know how you can be a member of SPJ Detroit if you are not already, if you want to donate to our scholarships or any other initiatives. Free press matters in bringing accountability to power and money and how we live our lives. But coming into the last question, there were a few questions about like FOIA reform, transparency more broadly. Has the reporting over the last few years, has this experience like led you, Beth, first, and then Chad, I'm curious your answer too, has it led you to any thoughts about like what is needed in Michigan regarding FOIA reform? If certain changes were in place, if the FOIA laws were different, do you think this grant might not have been approved? Do you think this recent heat legislation will meaningfully make it easier to retrieve some of the info that otherwise, we can't get? That's a lot to bundle in together. But broadly speaking, what can and should we be doing to make this a more transparent and fair state?
So first off, before I answer that, I just wanted to give a shout out to Bridge Michigan too, because they've done a lot of reporting on the earmark stuff as well, and have done really important work as well. And I think among all the outlets that have reported on this, I think it's shown kind of the issue with this kind of stuff and led to reforms because of that. The other thing I will say is that, so FOIA. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's the issues that everybody has, right? That my biggest issue with this is, well, the legislature and governor aren't subject to it, and we could learn oodles if we had FOIA that would allow us to see how this grant was communicated among everyone at the outset. With the existing FOIA law, the reports on Bay Dune, I got in a pretty timely manner, but that hasn't always been my experience with the MEDC. And if they ever require a payment, you are in for a long haul, because as soon as you put the first down payment on, they run the clock. Now, they'll say it's because they're short-staffed and they can't handle all the FOIAs that are coming in right now. I also think that's a staffing decision to short-staff your FOIA office. And so I don't have a ton of sympathy for that. And as far as the earmark, it definitely is better than it was, right? Like, we are going to have advance notice now, filings of what is going to be in the budget if they stick to this. I think that's a big if, but if they stick to this law, we will have advance notice. The one thing that still is difficult about it is that there are so many requests put in that it's overwhelming, and it's hard to parse through them all because there are so many of them, and to really see like which ones are which. And so that is like one kind of flaw in it, that like, would we have found a grant like this and been able to zero in on it if there's 500 requests? I don't know that we would have gotten to it before the budget passed, but there are a lot of eyeballs on it too, so maybe somebody else would have found it and flagged it for us. So I guess that's my kind of take on it.
Yeah, I would add that if we had FOIA in the legislature and the governor's office, much of this story would already be done, known, maybe even adjudicated. I mean, essentially, if we could just prove, like, if there was a way to get FOIA for Speaker Wentworth's text messages or his staff's text messages to find out if they were coordinating for this, or the governor's staff, if they were coordinating for it, or some senator was doing their bidding. I mean, if we were able just to basically been able to do that from the start, we probably would have been able to establish a lot of facts, understand this a lot faster. This is dragged out for 3 years because they don't want someone doesn't want something known, and so we've just continued just to, keep trying to peel back the onion, and in any way we can. I mean, Beth's lost track of how many FOIAs she's filed just for this story alone. And we have found other stories along the way, just intercepted issues that we didn't know anything about. Our recent report on the Michigan Economic Development Foundation was kind of a result of some of Quentin Messer's emails and calendar entries, and so this this story started as, okay, let's collect the one pagers and let's see what these things are all about and who's behind them, and try to get some clarity on the murkiness of this. And it's just kind of cascaded. But yeah, I mean, FOIA, it's not there. It's not coming. I mean, I think that is, at least in the near future, uh, based on the current climate and current leadership, there is, with the exception of a couple of lonely term limited senators, there is not really a major appetite to do this. The 45-day disclosure was a start. But one of the flaws that could be we don't know how it's going to be administered. Are they going to put these all out in the budget? Are they going to actually put them in their individual budgets they pass in April and May? Or are they going to wait till 45 days until they know they're going to be really passing the budget? It means you get delayed to August if they take it down to the wire. And so how this actually plays out is still yet to be seen. And also, the other caveat is, what gets put in a proposal doesn't necessarily always end up the same way in law. And like, global link is just a few words in a budget bill, and it took 9 months to just decode the first few words, and then it's taken a subsequent 2.5 years to unspool this big ball of wax.
Well, with that, I feel like a few of the lessons I'm taking from this is, just being reminded yet again of how, one of the great joys and sometimes pains of journalism is how every story is 10,000 other stories. That part, that the persistence of this is very impressive. And I know everybody in this room is really grateful for the work that you've been doing, Beth LeBlanc, Chad Livengood, the Detroit News more broadly, all the reporters who have been pursuing stories about money and power, and working what transparency laws are available to us to their very limit. I see there's another question about like FOIA. I think that can be a seed for perhaps a future event, because I think there's a lot to say on that. But thank you, Beth, Chad, for being with us tonight. Thank you, all the guests who are with us live and those who are going to be watching the video. We look forward to reading all the stories that come next. So thank you,
Thank you for
everyone.
having me.
Have a good
Thank you.
night.